Hi, everybody. This is Scott Park Phillips, and I have Joseph Houseal here uh, to talk about his Mudra project. And it's pretty cool. And so we're just gonna go right into it. Uh, Joseph is the founder of Culture of Core.
Core
And
of culture.
sorry, Core of Culture. I was looking right at the word too.
Maybe we should change it.
No, it's good. It's good. Core of Culture. And the project he's doing right now is called Mudra and the Diamond Spheres. And there's a four-part lecture, and two of the lectures have been done already, but people can join for the next two, and all of that will be public soon. Uh, so, and the first two were really great. And I am a huge fan of Mudra and thinking about Mudra because of my background in Indian classical dance. It uh, and and I could talk about that, but it had a huge influence on me and how I see movement and how I see ideas and how I see the concepts of enlightenment. So I might dig into that a little bit, but why don't you tell us what the this part of the project is and what the bigger project is?
Sure. I can begin by telling you how it all started. My organization over the last 20 years has documented a lot of ancient dances, and particularly dances in the Himalayas, and particularly Buddhist monks and holy men and sacred traditions and things that we might not call dance in the West, that they are more of movement tradition in the East. And we would document these, especially movement traditions that are endangered. In 2 years ago, I made my first visit to Tabo Monastery. Tabo Monastery is an important monastery for many reasons, but one is that it was founded in 996 and is the oldest extant operational monastery in all of India and the Himalayas. And because so much was destroyed by China and also by the Kashmiri Singh campaigns throughout Ladakh, much was destroyed and is still sort of in that political setup from when the Kashmiris invaded Ladakh, but they never reached Tabo, and the Chinese never reached Tabo. So Tabo remains a rare architectural, artistic, and cultural example of a period where there's not a lot of evidence, the 10th and 11th century. It's also known for its extraordinary 11th century and 13th century artwork, sculptures, and paintings, where they brought painters from Kashmir and other places to create this extraordinary location. But it's probably most well known uh, for its association with the Lotsawa Rinchen Zangpo, who was a translator. And in the 10th and 11th centuries, Tabo was a site of translation, where the Indian Buddhist scriptures were translated into Tibetan and thereby saved for posterity because they were later lost and destroyed in India. So that is what Tabo is most well known for. But from the point of view of a movement practitioner, it's rather extraordinary that Tabo has had an unbroken practice of tantric rituals for 1,000 years. It dates to before sectarian Buddhism. Now, Tibetan Buddhism is in four big sects. They're all generally united, but there are distinctions and there are geographic distinctions. So now, Tabo is run by the sect that the Dalai Lama leads, the Gelug sect. But Tabo's history goes back to before there were sects in Tantric Buddhism. And so it's a very important place. I went to Tabo because there are two dance traditions that ended up at Tabo when exiled Tibetan lamas escaped in the 50s and 60s and 80s and got to Tabo and dropped off dance traditions. So I went to the abbot of Tabo, who was a young Tibetan man named Kanden Rinpoche, erudite man, appointed by the Dalai Lama, and I asked him if we could please document their dance traditions. And Kanden Rinpoche, the abbot of the monastery, said something interesting. He said, well, I can tell you that most of the abbots outside of Tibet already know who you are. And so I said, well, why do they know who I am? And he said, because no one knows your name. And we all know the logo of your organization. Do I have one here? We know you help monks. And I said, well, that's fine. I can live with that definition. And he said, you can do our dances if you want, but what I'd really like you to do is come back and document our Vajradhatu ritual. And so I said, well, of course, we'd be happy to help any way you can. We had documented a ritual last year at Dorje Drak Monastery in Shimla, and it's different. It's a different beast to document a ritual from documenting a dance, even when the ritual has dance in it. So it's an interesting sort of situation to document a ritual. We have a little experience. So we said we'd be happy to help you. And then he threw in there as a little bit of a temptation. He said, the Vajradhatu ritual has 37 unique 1,000-year-old mudra. It does. Well, that's interesting. So we agreed. So we went on to say, well, we do some research in the ritual so we could document it to its best depiction. And in doing that, we learned that the Dalai Lama visited Thabo in 1996. And on that trip, he noticed this is a 3-dimensional 1,000-year-old Vajradhatu mandala hall here. And for some reason, they didn't know that. I believe because the iconography can be interpreted different ways. And the Dalai Lama wondered, why aren't you doing the Vajradhatu ritual in a place where it was clearly done 1,000 years ago? So the Dalai Lama returned in 2003 and 2005, and he re-empowered the Vajradhatu ritual to the monks at Thabo. And since 2005, they've done it every year. And so in learning this, we thought, no, this is very interesting. Because how was it possible that the Dalai Lama was able to reintroduce a ritual 1,000 years later into a site where it happened 1,000 years ago? Now, some scholars who aren't familiar with transmitted traditions, like movement traditions, think it's all postmodern. No, he made it up. Oh, they made it up so they could control the site and they could. And I was like, they could have, like Nishinsky's Rite of Spring was reconstructed, not knowing what Nishinsky really did.
Yeah.
But even that is interesting. It's still interesting and welcomed. And I thought, well, that's not really what Buddhists do. So we put our team to it and found that the Dalai Lama received a transmission from a Sakya sect Lama that does something called the Kunrig ritual, which is extremely similar to the Vajradhatu ritual. But what we noticed was that in this Thabo monastery, one of the most researched monasteries on earth by the top most elite scholars in the world, they've never paid any attention to the ritual at all. Nothing. And in fact, even a study of mudra, which are ubiquitous in Asian religion, Asian art, Asian sculpture, Asian dance, martial arts, yoga, everywhere, it's barely studied, barely looked at. And it's an extremely complex, old language, if you will. I mean, mudra can be understood. Mudra, by the way, are hand gestures, empowered hand gestures that you will see Indian dancers perform. When you take even a meditation posture in your lap, that's a mudra. Mudra are empowered hand gestures. And so we realized, well, actually the thing linking the modern Buddhist practice and the reintroduced ritual and the 1,000-year-old art on the wall as sculptures and paintings is the mudra. And no one's ever checked to see if the mudra in the ritual are actually the same as the mudra on the walls.
Right.
And if they are, well, then clearly something is the same 1,000 years later. Something's consistent, which from a movement person makes me think, maybe the mudra was the real transmission. Maybe the mudra was the transmission, not the words. Because what's exciting about this ritual, here it is at Tabo Monastery, from Kashmir to Rinchen Zangpo to Tabo Monastery in the 10th century. It was in Japan in the 9th century. It was in Indonesia in the 6th, 7th, and 8th century. People don't understand that Tantra went all around the world. And the Japanese are doing a version of this same ritual. And the Indonesians have several variants that branched off from Borobudur and the original introduction of Tantra into Indonesia. So all of this, you have mudra and mandalas, mantra, at the vanguard of advancing Buddhism. But no one's really looked at how mudra do that or what mudra communicates. And so we thought, well, we will document this ritual for Tabo, and we will do research on the ritual's history. And we will specifically use mudra as an agent of exploration. So that was the genesis of our project. And so we thought we would begin the project rather than introducing complex Tabo, coming in with mudra. Let's look at mudra first as a topic, and then let the mudra lead us to Tabo.
That's brilliant. So this is section 1 of the project. This is the first part. Correct. Do you know what the second part is yet? Do you know
absolutely.
How many parts?
Absolutely. And it's a very good question, because this project receives its lead funding from the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation in Hong Kong, and additional funding from the Kipper Family Foundation. So yes, we do. It's a 4-year project. But then the COVID came, and we had to create a plan B. So the speaker series, which includes Sharon Lowen, one of the greatest exponents of classical Indian dancing, and then Prajwal Bhattacharya, a 35th generation Nepalese Newar tantric priest, followed by Tinlis Dorji, who was a Buddhist monk in Ladakh, who got a PhD, and now he's doing research, to arguably the world's foremost art historian on this subject. And these 4 people, a dancer, a priest, a monk, and an art historian, are how we're first approaching the topic.
And part 2?
Oh, well, part 2 will be, to just sort of further explain, the original intention was the speakers would all be in one room for a weekend, co-informing each other. And when we couldn't do that, we thought, well, let's open that up to the public. So we've opened up the speaker series, but in fact, it's 4 researchers talking to each other, with me and Don Lopez, who's introducing it, which makes up our core research team. So we've sort of opened up our private introductions professionally to other people. But this is as a transition of it. Part 2 here is we're going to analyze the talks and create a glossary from the 4 talks, because each of these 4 people uses language differently, uses language in regard to movement differently. Each of them is speaking probably in their 2nd or 3rd or 4th language. And there's special languages. Meditation has special language, metaphoric language, twilight language, dance vocabulary, special languages. So not only do we have 4 different people in 4 different professions speaking 4 different languages, but they use language in a special way. And so we want to create a glossary from these 4 speakers, collate all that, and let that movement direct us on how we're going to go forward. Next summer, the plan is to document the ritual at Tabo, but before that, we are bringing ritual specialists from the Dalai Lama at Dharamshala and from South India to further train the monks in the performance of the mudra, and also to train the monks how to make the sand mandala, which they never learned in 2005. They use an image of a sand mandala. So if we could get the sand mandala taught, and the performance of these unusual mudra improved in May and June, then in late June, July, we can document the rituals. There are a lot of factors that will weigh in before next summer, but that's the plan for year 1.
Wow. And can I get just sort of a peek at year 4?
Oh, sure, sure. Year 2 and 3 will be following these rituals in Japan and Indonesia.
Oh, wow, fantastic.
Yeah. And then year 4 is to create an exhibition. But one of the things that we feel ethically bound to is that we want to be able to show an exhibition in the cultures that are represented in the exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
But it's complex because most of those cultures don't have world-class art management systems.
Mm-hmm.
So what we call an exhibition in the West is usually very fine art, treated by museums, handled by professionals, costing millions, climate control. They don't have that in Ladakh. They don't have that in Nepal. They don't have that in most places in Indonesia. Well, does that mean you don't include them? Or you change the nature of your exhibition? And maybe you have an art exhibition, but it's its own thing.
Hmm.
So we want to create an exhibition that's multimedia that we could have at the Varanasi Buddhist University and have a meeting of Western scholars and Buddhist monk scholars and use the exhibition as a stimulus for conversation. So that's what we hope to have in 4 years, is an exhibition that we can take to places like Buddhist colleges or places where we could set this up to have it as a part of the dialogue, so that the exhibition and the work and the people and would be part of the dialogue. So now, at the beginning, we have 4 people. Well, in 4 years, it would be nice if we had Western academics and Buddhist academics instead of 1 monk and 1 academic. Mm-hmm. So in 4 years, we hope to grow the discussion into the communities.
That's a beautiful vision. Really, yeah, it's really exciting. Well, maybe we can talk a bit just about Mudra, get people into this idea. Because I watched the first 2 talks.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so as an Indian dancer, I learned Kathak, which is North India dance, and of all the dance styles, maybe it's a little bit short on Mudra and Mime compared to the other dance styles, but it's not short on Mudra and Mime at all. And the way we defined it was that there's image mime, which is where you're actually creating the illusion of something, and then there's image mime, where that's your lamplight, right? Or and then there's these things which are mudras or not, right? So I think she showed the flute, and there are different ways of showing the flute, right? And so we'll show the flute in Kathak with just one hand, because everybody knows that it's if you have the peacock feather, you can see me, that it's Krishna. So you don't need to show the whole flute. There's this.
It's literally shorthand. Sorry, I had to say that.
Right. You have and the certain mudras actually invoke deities, right? And she went into the Sanskrit version too, from the Natya Shastra. Oh no, it wasn't the Natya Shastra. We learned it as from the Natya Shastra. She actually located it somewhere else in time. But this sort of statement about how mood is created, beginning with the hand, and so something that really has bothered me in conversations with academics that I think got really brought out beautifully in the 2 discussions is the idea that enlightenment is actually a performance. That mood, right? Mood, or what's called abhinaya, and just abhinaya is the display of emotion, right? And rasa is the experience of it, maybe something like that, right? But then you have these other categories that are associated with enlightenment, which are they abhinaya? Are they rasa? No, there's something else, right? They're truth, right? And that's where they line up with this idea of mantra and mudra, and that sometimes those are the same thing. We really got into that idea that mudra could actually be a state of mind. I don't know, did you want to talk about that? You've been listening to these people.
Well, no, that's very, very interesting what you're saying. In listening to the first two speakers, and also I've been studying with Prajwal a little bit, I think it'd be very interesting to distill what actually is mimetic in Mudra. Because when I first asked Sharon, who's an old friend, I asked Sharon, like, would she be involved in Mudra? And she went, Mudra? Oh, you mean like when you're wrapping a snake around your neck? Yeah, that's what I mean. But that was her first reaction. Right. And it was like, well, you are actually miming putting a snake around your neck. Right. And so I did very much like her breakdown of the lamp.
Right. Tika, it's what is that?
What is that?
I'm miming putting the tika on, but it's way more than that because it's symbolizing the actual ritual of initiation. Right? Mm-hmm. It's a sudden summary of this, of opening the third eye, right? I mean, it's everything, right? It's
well, I think it's very interesting if you're looking at how Mudra went from places where language is really different. I mean, Chinese language is really different from languages in India, and really different from Indonesian languages, and really different from Japanese. So if you believe that there's some authentic vocalic truth to mantra, it's going to get messed up by the time it gets to China, because it's certainly not going to sound the same as what it sounded like in India. However, you can do the mudra the same way. That's not difficult to do. So I'm wondering, in all of this expansion and cross-cultural movement, how much did mimesis, how much did mime communicate? Because there's a lot of mime. I think what you're saying about enlightenment is interesting. You use the word performance. I certainly have noticed with a lot of academics I've worked with, it's like it was an experience. The Buddha had an experience of enlightenment. He didn't have an intellectual realization of it. He had a personal, total body experience in a certain position. Right. And it's so interesting that everyone doesn't even look at that. Enlightenment is rarely discussed as an experience by scholars, but it's 1000% an experience. And one of the things that I enjoy doing in a project like this is bringing together these voices, because professions have their limits and their expectations of what it means to advance and be recognized. Donald Lopez, who is one of the top Buddhist scholars in the world, wrote, there we are, he's the man. I also realized, I told him before, he's got a fan club all over the world. I got so many love. Dr. Lopez, extend his section. I didn't realize he's got groupies. But it was so interesting because he wrote a book called The Curators of the Buddha early in his career. And it was a critical look at Buddhist studies. And so sort of a sarcastic title, The Curators of the Buddha. Yeah, thanks a lot, all of you. You know, who do you think you are? But he wrote something very interesting about his own experience of going to South India as a young man and scholar and PhD in South India to study a certain text. And he talks about the reaction of the monks when the Lama agreed to work with Donald, because the reaction of the monk was, why are you taking our Lama away from us? You're a Buddhist expert? What culture would look at you as a Buddhist expert? You couldn't get past our first grade here. And yet our Lama is dropping everything to spend time with you every single day. And Donald was very interested to point that out. And he said, I know that. And when I finish this, I'm going to go back to the University of Michigan and be an expert on Buddhism in my culture. And so it was very interesting, but I noticed in bringing Prajwal, who is a 35th generation priest, to these two great scholars, Christian Luxanetz and Donald Lopez, are elite. They're some of the top scholars in the world. I'm so grateful they're in this project. Neither of them knew him. I think Christian knew of him. Neither of them had talked to him. And I was sort of like, how can you guys call yourselves experts in Buddhism? Knock on his door, send him an email, give him a call. He'll pick up the nicest guy in the world. Yeah. How is it your professions? That's the first person I talked to. Where's the dancer? I didn't even meet Prajwal as a priest. I was looking for the best dancer. You know, and that's how I met Prajwal. We're very good friends. We've known each other more than 20 years. But I saw both of the scholars light up when Prajwal, who was his living encyclopedia, started to talk. I think their eyes sort of, light bulb went on, you know, like, wow. And the notion of what's a source, what's your source of information, what's a repository of knowledge, what's source material? Is source material a book, or is source material 1,000 years of transmitted lineage? What's a source material? And both of the scholars were very grateful to hear from Prajwal and to learn from Prajwal. But I realized, like, well, this little project has allowed this meeting to happen. And that alone, those things without us could go off and do great things. So bringing these kinds of minds together, and really professions. Prajwal is professionally a priest. Donald is professionally a professor. So is Christian. Sharon is professionally a dancer. And Tinlis is a former monk, but he's professionally really a Ladakhi activist. So it's their professions are different. And so bringing people together that your profession sort of doesn't encourage you to go meet, but actually would probably be really good people to know to broaden understanding.
Yeah, no, that's great. Like, that's it. It's also so obvious, you know, right now that there's that the West is no, I mean, it sounds like I'm a romantic or a mystic or something, pointing out that you know, they're stuck in the text, but they know it's a mistake. They mostly know it.
I don't know that it's a mistake. I think it's a specialty. And in Donald Lopez's essay from his book Curators of the Buddha, it's really brilliant. His essay is titled Sitting at the Feet of the Lama. Like, that's a Western romantic notion. If I could just go to the Himalayas and sit at the feet of a lama. And so he thought, yeah, God, nonsense. You got to travel there. I got a grant. I went there. I went to South India. I met the lama. The lama I wanted wasn't where. They gave me lama number 2. And then lama number 2 seemed to be the right guy. All right. And then lama number 2 says, well, here's what we'll do, Donald. We'll read it. We'll get together every day. I'll read a section and you read a section. If we want to ask something, we'll ask it, and we'll deal with that, and then I'll continue reading it, and then you'll continue reading it. And one of Donald's conclusions at the end of the essay was, that's reading a text. Oh, that's how you read a text. Oh, that's what they mean when they say read a text. It's different than, and then where did he find himself? Sitting at the feet of a lama. Mm-hmm. So he went over with this romantic notion as nonsense, and just by the course of events, he got what he wanted and realized he was sitting at the feet of a lama. And so there's a lot of awakenings that come at high levels. And so on the other hand, Don Lopez has built up Buddhist studies and Buddhist publishing, and all of these things help build the Buddhist world. So what I see, rather than this is insufficient or this is missing something or that, what I see in all of this is, how is Buddhist lived in the 21st century? All these ways. It's lived all these ways. It has a scholarly life, an academic life, a monastic life, a personal practice life, an enlightenment life. It has all these ways. And this is how Buddhist lives in the world. So rather than one discipline describing it or another, we're trying to get a few together and hopefully harmonize a conversation that would be productive to many people's understanding. But that's part of the goal of the project.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you described the Vajradhatu ritual, and you're like, wait, can we line up the images in the space, the paintings, with the mudras that are being done? And I thought, oh yeah, well, let's see, if one of the mudras is wrong, will you fix the painting or will you fix the mudra in the hand? You know, now, I mean, not to say that you would. I'm just that I was like, oh, that's sort of obvious.
Well, one of the things, I guess because you're in movement, that's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah.
and so, but it's not what other scholars would think of. So I think one of the things I've tried to do with this project, because I've gone over each talk with the speaker before they do it, and I know them, and we talk, and I sort of explained to the group, like, everybody gets to tell their history their way with no interruptions and no corrections. They want to tell their history the way they tell it. They want to tell their history the way they tell it. You can tell it the way you want to tell it. And everybody gets to tell their story the way they want to tell it, the way they've learned it, the way they taught it. And I think this is really interesting. So rather than have the typical academic thing where you do a defensive presentation and then people attack you and you defend against the attacks, this was like, no, let people. So one of the things we want to do in this project is create a glossary. Did I mention that already?
Yeah. But I was just going to summarize that. It's like thick description, like Clifford Gertz thick description conference, right?
Right. But I think what we want to do is like, well, I want everybody to know you can say it however you want to say it. And we're also asking people to talk about movement. I've been a dance critic for many, many years. It's really difficult to talk about movement. And I've reviewed opera a few times, usually when a famous choreographer does something with the opera. And I write for something called a Bach Track in London now. And the editor said something really interesting to me. He said, if you're going to keep reviewing opera, you must learn to review the voices and the singing the way that you review the bodies and the dancing. I thought that was very, very good advice. I really took that to heart. And I realized I'm not doing that. I certainly can describe dancing. I certainly can describe. So I think the idea of what the profession brings to it is an interesting thing. So rather than say she's right, he's wrong, she's right, he's wrong, I first want to have everybody just say what they say and get it out there. And one of the things in the Mudra, I wrote an article for Arts of Asia that I can send to you, and you're welcome to send around, on the wisdom Buddhas, which would be the main Buddhas that are the four quadrants in the center of Vajradhatu, as performed iconography. And I wrote this article for Arts of Asia to talk about precisely that. So I think taken all together, it's just trying to make a multivalent approach.
Vajra, I know the word Vajra. What's Dhatu?
Dhatu means sphere. Okay, so diamond sphere, Vajradhatu.
Oh, right.
Okay, and so it can be translated different ways. The adamantine realm.
Yeah.
Okay, Dhatu is a cosmos, a realm. So Vajra meaning diamond or adamantine or the heart of the truth of the teaching. These would all be Vajradhatu.
So Vajra, when it gets translated into Chinese, becomes this mudra, which is the thunderbolt.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes, you use that in your books.
Right. Or actually it can be just the ring, right, which is the empty space between the lightning strike and the thunderbolt. And that idea of Vajra, and there is a sort of a device called a Vajra.
Of course, yeah.
And you also do the other thing we didn't talk about was whole body mudras, right? Because once you're doing mime, right, there's the Vajra and the lotus, right? And I actually am gonna be one of my side projects, which I sort of started and dropped and I'm gonna restart, which is this kind of idea of a universal key of movement, where you have this pattern showing up all over the place.
But that's essentially what Prajwal did. Did you notice that with Prajwal?
Yeah.
That's essentially what he's doing. I mean, that's how he actually warms up. He has all of these hand warm-ups, and they go around the body and they come back down. And so, yeah, it's just rehearsing that. And the other thing, just to let you know, that your book really helped me with, especially the Tai Chi Bagua and the Golden Elixir. which I must say you've got to do a better job writing about the golden elixir. You write your whole book and then you get the golden elixir and say, well, I can't really say what it is. You've been saying everything else. So you really need to spit that one out. But what is interesting, not only have scholars overlooked the mudra, the movement, Vajradhatu is not a deity, it's a concept, okay? And the Vajradhatu, all right, the diamond realm is within you, son, okay? The diamond realm is something you create, putting the four-headed Vajrachana in your heart, sending something out in the front and putting one of the wisdom deities there, and bam, sending one out the back and putting a wisdom deity there. Bam, putting a wisdom deity out there, putting a wisdom deity out there. So you're sitting in a circumference defined by the wisdom deities, and then you cap it and you get a semicircular dome inside you, and then you put one underneath. That's the Vajradhatu. Okay, that's the golden elixir.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. And it's like, so the most oldest, fundamental, most profound Tantra is the Vajradhatu ritual that's actually there to teach you to create the golden elixir.
And it looks like they had it in India too. They had a version of this, like the forest dwelling people had some description. I don't know if you've seen, I think it's Jeffrey Samuel's work, where he's talking about what he's trying to sort out what's Chinese and what's Indian. And he goes way back in Indian history and finds that ritual.
He does. I like him, but to Jeffrey Samuels, right?
Yeah.
I like him, but there's a problem with his work. He's very brilliant. But what he does, what a lot of anthropologists do, they invent their own categories. And then a member of my board said, and then let me guess, they talk about the categories. That's exactly what he does. So it's rather than find out what the actual categories are, rather than find out how the locals break it down, rather than find out how anybody else looked at the ritual, he'll create 3 totally new categories that help him break it down. And then he discusses his own categories. So he's a very brilliant scholar, but he's got that anthropological flaw of inventing categories and discussing his own categories. And it's brilliant, but you got to wade through a lot of that stuff in his work. So I don't diminish his brilliance, but anthropology has problems as a soft science, I think.
No doubt.
Any science that is built on debunking who came before you isn't much of a science. All right? You should build on what came before you. And so anyway, so I think he's great, but I think that one of the things we're trying to do here is rather than me tell you what a Nepalese priest thinks, let's bring on the Nepalese priest and see what he thinks. Basic things, but they aren't done so often. So
Joseph, it's great because I've been hitting into that and trying to communicate with the martial arts studies world, is that there's these people like, if we can just get the categories right, we can have this universal conversation. And I'm like, no, it's not going to work. And then there's another group that's like, if we can just, debunk enough stuff, we'll get to the core of what's true. And like, right. No, that's not it either. Like, and it's like, you have to figure out what people thought in the past. You actually have to make the jump to trying to figure out, even though it's hard.
I agree, and it's one of the things you do in your books, and it's one of the interesting things, a scholarly position. And Christian is such a good scholar, he knows how to goad into good thinking. But he's like, look, dancing is in the present, is it not? Yes, it is. Nothing is more in the present than dancing. As soon as you do it, it's over. Okay? And he's like, we have no idea what anybody was doing. No idea at all. How can you say that? Well, that's coming from somebody that's never learned a transmitted tradition. Anybody who's learned a transmitted tradition knows that, in fact, so one of the things, and I had members of the salon writing me like, people really believe everything changes because everything changes. Not in places where they don't change things, and not in places where the efficacy of offering. My Indian advisor was saying, look, you don't change things if you want your offering to work. You know, and this goes back to how precise geomantic Bugaku had to be for the Chinese emperor. If you made a mistake, they killed you. You know, it was like, so no, there are traditions. And so if we can show, well, if the mudras, if these 37 mudra in the ritual are the same as the walls. Now, what's interesting about the walls is in these, the Arts of Asia article, the reason I brought that up was because in the 5 basic mudra of the wisdom Buddhas are the Buddha touches the ground. Mm-hmm. All right, he's got one hand in his lap and one hand touching the ground for enlightenment. He turns that palm outward to give the teachings. And the teachings he's going to give is the Dharma. So he has the mudra of the Dharma. And then once you get the Dharma, you get meditation. So you have the mudra of meditation. And then after you get the mudra of meditation, you have protection. So these 5 mudras are rolled out. However, in Tabo, rather than putting your hand in front of your leg, the Tabo deities put their hand to the side of the leg. So if you're sitting cross-legged, all right, I've got my left hand in my lap, my right hand touching the ground in front of my knee. In Tabo, he's touching the ground on the outside of his body. In the second deity, my left hand is in my lap, my right hand is turned out in front of my knee, sitting in cross-legged. In Tabo, the hand is outside of the body, facing out. So the hands are facing in and out the same, but one is in front of the knee and one is on the outside of the body. So in Tabo, even these very, very well-known, iconic mudra are performed a little differently. And there are also some deities painted in Tabo that aren't Buddhist. They're pre-Buddhist deities. So I'm wondering, is there an antiquity in the way they're done at Tabo? So rather than who's right and who's wrong, it's like, how complex is this? How many variations did this? And the simple fact that mudra have been performed forever. I mean, almost throughout all of human history. They go back to at least 2500 BC and have never stopped being performed ever in the world. And have come and proliferated and crossed boundaries and gone to different cultures. There is something very significant in the meaning and power of mudra, simply in that it's been practiced for more than 2,000 years in a lot of different ways. And nobody's really looked at it. So that's part of the stimulation of it for me anyway.
Whoa. Yeah, I'm not sure where to go from here. I certainly deeply appreciate that the way you've just, you're just connecting all of these different realms together. And I'm really excited to see what happens in year 2 and 3 when we get to see the same thing in another culture, because that's, this is actually the anthropological question, and I actually totally agree with you. Like, we need to get away from the debunkers and the categorizers, but the question, since you put culture in the name of your group, Core of Culture, where do you come down on what is culture? And I'll just point out that the main debate is between what we'll go really strong definition of culture, which is the categories of in that culture are so unique that you can't understand it. Right, you're going to be just left in the cold trying to enter it. It's like you can hang out in the culture, but you're going to have your own interpretation of the experience. It's not that one. And then the weaker definitions of culture are that it's that the core of what's human is transmittable, and we can just connect with it, and that this is a surface thing. So I want your answer to that, but I want to just preface, before I give you a chance to answer that, with saying that my own experience is that the dancers are the first over the border, that wherever. If there's a culture meeting, the dancers are the first over the border.
Well, one of the things I think in terms of looking at culture, and go back to your first definition, I think you have to be very clear about what cultures have an understanding of individualism and what don't. So to say like, oh, you live your culture your own way, a lot of cultures do not have that idea at all. There's no idea of the individual. There's no idea of like my life and I'm doing my thing. It's not really there's cultures where that's not a prevalent idea. It's prevalent in the West. I do my thing. But it's very interesting. Core of culture for us is similar to more to your second definition, but the idea that the core of a culture is what people do, and what people, and dancing, certainly you say they're the first over the board. Years ago, I used to work for the singer Shaka Khan, and I was her artistic director. And there were so many situations where I would see musicians from different countries, from different instruments, that didn't speak the same language, and would get in a room and could immediately start playing together, and incredibly play together. That's where language doesn't matter so much. I'm a dancer by profession for many years. I connect with other dancers just intuitively. Prajwal and I connect as dancers. Dancers don't use language the same way as normal people do. So the same question is like, well, what do you learn in Zen Buddhism? Words don't work. Put your hand up in the air. There's your answer. So even Zen Buddhism is built on the premise that words can't express the truth. So it's very interesting. So the core of culture, and it was actually when I was forming Core of Culture, I had a very good friend who was an artist, and he was a hillbilly. He was really from the South, and he was really from the mountains. And he just said, well, where I come from, people take care of their own. If dancing is the core of culture, shouldn't dancers be saving dancing? And I thought, God, is that spot on? And that's when we named it Core of Culture. So it's like, yeah, the core of culture is what people do. And so the other thing that influenced me was the Prajwal, who you heard speak the other day. He was like, I've worked with so many academics, and they're confused about what Buddhism is. Buddhism is not a book. Buddhism is not architecture. Buddhism is not art. Buddhism is the practice of Buddhist practice.
Uh-oh. I momentarily lost
on
it.
Architecture. Or people think they're writing on Buddhism.
Can you repeat? We lost the connection for a second. Buddhism is.
He's saying Buddhism is practice. Buddhism is not architecture. So this person thinks they're writing about Buddhism, but they're writing about architecture. They're not writing about Buddhism. They think they're writing about Buddhism. They're writing about painting. And he's like, he said, so many Western experts in Buddhism are not dealing with Buddhism at all. They're dealing with the accoutrement, the external picture of it. They're not dealing with Buddhism, which is practice. And so when, and this as a martial artist, practice is the core of everything. So this is really bringing what might seem obvious to a scholar, to what might seem obvious to a dancer, to what might seem obvious to a priest. So that's part of the idea that there's a core in all of these we're trying to bring together.
So can you do that in year 4? Can you do that in the museum or the traveling project?
We hope so. We're trying to think how we can do that best. And really the thrilling thing for me is if what we create can truly become a stimulus for a broader conversation, and maybe even to prefigure those groups in an assembly of people around an exhibition to have conversations, to take it to the next level. So that's one of our goals.
I simply love the way you're putting things together and envisioning its fruition in the larger world.
I have to say the Ho Foundation, Anita Chung in particular, very much helped me develop the ideas with clarity. I'm indebted to her. Hey, I really enjoyed this today. Talk, as you know, in the speaker series. I don't talk in the speaker series. And so I think my next meeting is coming on here.
Okay.
And so it's a pleasure to talk to you. Let's do it again.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone who listening to this, please tune in to the speaker series. I'll put the link below.
My call's gone. No, I don't want to rush you. Thank you so much. I was saying it was nice for me to say some things because as the moderator, I don't. I just go to my specialists and let them speak. So thank you very much. I really appreciated it.
My pleasure. Bye.
We'll talk again.
Yes.